Good job. Traditional workplace culture takes up a significant portion of your adult life. It not only pays the bills, but it shapes your personal identity, your mental health, and your overall well-being. In fact, it places a lot of emphasis on values of authority and adherence, and it's not surprising it often leads to a lot of stress or disengagement, and sometimes emotional distress being seen as inherent parts of the work experience. Traditional workplace culture is the older, more conventional way organizations expect people to behave at work. It's generally built around hierarchy, professionalism, fixed schedules, physical presence, and appearance. In simple terms, it expects you to show up, work hard, not complain too much, and prove yourself through loyalty and productivity. For anyone who has worked under this culture, you can easily recall some of your worst stresses bearing fruit from it. And we've sort of chalked it up to the fact that this is how things are supposed to be done because it's always been done this way, or this is what professionalism or competence looks like. And I think for a lot of people, particularly those who arrive early or stay late, meet deadlines, and take pride in their work, the traditional workplace culture is the way to go. But there are some inherent flaws in this type of system. Not only that, but there are many alternative methods that produce better results than the usual norms that people aren't exactly willing to give up. And this is what I'm going to talk about. This is due to the fact that traditional workplace culture has become so ingrained into our social identity that any alternatives could easily be seen as counterintuitive than anything else. I've been in a number of different work environments and have found some largely contrasting philosophies amongst them, more particularly with hostile workplaces and effective ones. I think the distinction between the two is pretty clear, and they're good indicators of the type of culture that's put in place in a work setting. Hostile environments aren't always characterized by overt abuse or legally actionable misconduct. More often than not, they're described as atmospheres of high tension in the air, or fear of something bad is always going to happen, or just really simple dysfunction in teamwork. I think the usual pattern in these environments is this formation of unwritten rules based on idealized norms of the workplace, and when somebody deviates from them, tensions arise. Here's the thing. When you're spending a majority of your hours feeling like you're stepping on eggshells, too afraid to speak up out of backlash, or feeling like folks around you are judging your every move, the psychological toll can be pretty substantial. You're going to find work dissatisfying, you're going to anticipate conflict all the time, and nobody's going to be working as effectively as they could be because everyone is occupied by this perversion of tension in the air. It can be the most chronically stressful situation that only does more harm than good. There's this book called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And what he argues about in his book is that strong groups are not successful because they have the smartest people. They are successful because they create the right social environment for people to work in. There are three things effective teams do. One, they build safety within the environment, of course, to make people sort of fit in. And the reason behind this is because people perform better when they feel like they belong. Secondly, they share vulnerability. Since strong groups are not built by pretending everyone is perfect, they are built when people can admit weakness. And a setting like this creates a willingness to be honest and thus improves trust. And thirdly, they establish purpose by making the group's priorities sort of clear, like through things by saying what we care about, what we are trying to become, what we do here, really that sort of stuff. And safety is relevant here. We need to create an environment where people feel secure enough to contribute and ask questions, make mistakes, and be honest without feeling humiliated or rejected. Building safety here means making people feel included and respected, like they belong and that their voice matters. I think there's sort of a distinct line between highly hostile and effective work environments. In a hostile setting, individuals will prioritize their efforts trying to avoid mistakes as opposed to learning from them. Likewise, there's going to be passive animosity that will prevent any sort of cooperative teamwork. And what also happens in these settings is that leaders will sometimes exercise their authority whenever they want to, unpredictably, and thus making everyone uncomfortable. In an effective work environment, by huge contrast, does set standards, but they foster trust and open communication. They also foster growth in a person's ability, and people will understand expectations clearly, but they'll also feel comfortable enough to ask questions and offer ideas to contribute meaningfully. There's sort of this harmony and effective collaboration where everyone is on the same wavelength because the crew has adopted proper guidelines that enable them to work seamlessly together. And the importance of comfort here, to be able to speak up, is an understatement. Out of many things like threats to authority, suppression of voice is a highway ticket to complete disconnection by your entire team. It's great that you want to be respected, but suppressing voices will only make people feel apprehensive with the expectation that speaking up will be met with backlash, and nothing they will say will hold any value whatsoever. When you suppress the voices of your workers, you're garnering a setting that doesn't value open communication, that instead values fear and overt respect out of a priority to uphold a traditional standard. One ingrained in distrust and control in your employees. This leads me to my second subject, autonomy. Let's start with the definition of autonomy. Autonomy is a capacity for self-governance, independence, and the ability to make informed, uncoerced decisions. Psychologically, it's where actions are driven by internal values and genuine interests rather than through external pressure. In most cases, traditional workplace culture is built on this system of constant supervision and hierarchies that are viewed as sort of necessary to maintain productivity and image. The framework operates under this assumption that workers need constant monitoring to remain productive. More than that, with things like micromanagement, it affirms a belief that work has to be approached in a certain way, in a certain fashion. And this is true in some instances, depending on the type of work that you do. But there's sort of a large degree of distrust that accompanies this mindset. And what it does is it undermines employees' motivation to truly engage themselves in the work they do. The more you expect employees to slack, the more it breeds resentment on their part, making them feel undervalued and distrusted, and so increasing the likelihood that they'll do the bare minimum. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. But when you adopt a strategy that respects a person's freedom to choose, or their ability to determine how they work best, they become more likely to take ownership of their responsibilities. In workplaces that do prioritize autonomy, they sort of operate under this assumption that their staff is capable, able to direct themselves, and invested in doing meaningful work. What happens is that employees given ownership over their work become more invested in its outcomes. They operate beyond simply fulfilling assigned tasks and start doing more, and thus trying to achieve excellence, if that makes sense. Because after all, at the end of the day, it's the outcome that matters. When you place trust in the process, workers feel respected and put more care into their work. This sort of shift in control to autonomy is less a loss in managerial authority and more of a redefinition of leadership and how it's actually meant to facilitate the needs of the staff. I think another defining characteristic of traditional workplace culture is this fixation on normalized expectations and professionalism. I don't want to be that guy who's shitting on everyone's hard work and labor through the system, but most of it is unnecessary, and that it gets in the way of authenticity and genuine success more than anything else. For example, during a job interview, if you have no experience within the field you're going into, you're expected to say that you'd like to gain as much experience as you can if you are given the opportunity. What you're essentially saying when you say you'd like to gain experience is, I need you to give me a chance so I can build my resume. Granted, There's really nothing that should be wrong about that. The issue, however, lies in the need to maintain an appearance and act unnaturally to get the job and feign eagerness going forward. The problem lies in this expectation that you need to sound endlessly enthusiastic about work instead of simply being honest. I'm not saying you should outright tell your potential employer that you need the job for the money. What I am saying is that there's sort of a binary black and white assumption that both interviewing parties need to go through this superficially established set of customs to determine whether the candidate is a fit for the job. A lot of interviewers likely have sort of a predefined list of words that they're looking for, like words like experience or problem solving or initiative. You could say this is normal, that they're looking for people to meet a certain criterion to seem reliable and whatnot. On the other hand, you can say we're losing independent thought in this regard. Instead of recognizing the complexity of a person's character, we're relying on established standards or a piece of paper to conclude whether a person is a worthy candidate for the job. That being said, this emphasis on established norms creates sort of a penalizing approach to originality and character. It's almost as if the system is at odds with traits that make us human, if that makes sense. We're like robots interacting in pre-programmed routines without any thought about its meaning. Those who don't follow the norm are at risk of being excluded or punished. In the modern world that's increasingly saying it's embracing diversity, I don't think it truly understands what it implicates. And this brings me to inclusion. A lot of workplaces brandish how diverse their community is in race or gender, but most of them are really no different in demanding folks to blend into a particular dynamic. Traditional workplace culture has pretty much often rewarded those who conform to a specific model of behavior. It likes to sort of mold people into these idealized figures that supposedly demonstrate competence and professionalism. But what it does as a result is it excludes individuals who operate differently, who can be equally capable as the others, or even more so. In this way, a lot of individuals are bound to be overlooked or labeled difficult because they don't function the same way others do. It's a topic that comes up pretty frequently in schools with standardized testing and whatnot, because every kid is not alike. And while we have programs in the workforce that do address these things, there's still somewhat of a stigma associated with being different in real time or in practice. Real inclusion requires adaptation to situations and people. It's really all about being responsive to differing needs and experiences, because people bring different strengths or perspectives and ways of working. And when those differences are acknowledged and supported, teams become more adaptable and effective at what they do. On another note, I think one of the most damaging aspects of traditional workplace culture is how it can sort of seep into and consume your personal life. Any cumulative stress directed at you from work is bound to make its way outside. Being in hostile work environments, I'd have experiences of negatively ruminating nonstop about my work stresses during my leisure time, and it was hell being psychologically tethered to all sorts of unresolved conflicts all the time. I can only imagine how often people lose sleep in relationships and their health and self-esteem because of how much pressure work puts on them. Talk about maintaining a proper work-life balance. And that's the sad part. Many people can't afford not to work, let alone be able to escape from it. For a lot of people, this is sort of a natural part of life. This is simply just how things go, and we have to push through it. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you're a hard worker with a strong work ethic, I get it. You want consistency and expect others to put in the effort. Work is a source of pride for you, and people need to perk up and shape themselves appropriately to the job description. Because after all, the standard exists for a reason. But you have to understand that a good number of people don't live to work. They work because they have to. It doesn't mean that they should put in less of an effort. It simply means that they don't make their occupation the centerpiece of their identity. It means they see work as a way to support themselves for a fuller, more complex life, one that includes family, personal growth, or really just leisure. If they take pride in their job, then that's a plus. But it doesn't always have to be that way. When workplace culture assumes your dedication to the job at the expense of everything else, it overlooks the means of fulfillment different people have for themselves. And yeah, there are times when work demands more. Deadlines approach, overtime becomes necessary. But in cases like these, overtime should, of course, be rewarded. But there's sort of a distinct line here between expectation and the exception. Occasional overtime is purposeful and strengthens a team's sense of shared effort and accomplishment. When it's routine and expected of you to show up every single time, it becomes exactly what it sounds like: routine and expected, and therefore dreadful. I think it honestly boils down to making work feel meaningful. It can't just be about getting through the day or meeting expectations that don't really mean anything to us. It should feel like the hours we spend at work are worth something, not just to the company, but to us as people. I think as long as work not only occupies a good sum of our lives, but sometimes when it makes it harder, the least we can do is rethink the way that we look at it and how we approach it. Anyways, that's just how I see it. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this, and I really hope it resonated with you one way or another. Work can be a hellish place for many folks, and I wanted to do something to connect with them because I could relate. The workplace doesn't have to be an unnecessarily stressful place. It's the people we work with and the guidelines we work under that makes our lives a literal hell. This video took quite a bit of time to make. I'm gonna squeeze it in between everything else I'm occupied with. I'll try to make more videos in future. What I'll definitely do is cover more informative topics like this. Maybe things about history or current events or politics. I'll figure things out as I go. I'll also do some vlogs in the future. Anything that pops up in my daily life will probably be recorded here. So until then, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.